This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight.
All right. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. We've got Matt Flint. Matt, what's your job title?
I'm the Senior Director of Infrastructure and Tech Ops.
So really our go-to motherfucker for networking, IT issues, and fixing people's systems. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So you did the Army, you transitioned, you kind of found these roles, and now you're at ZeroEyes kind of fixing people's networks and really giving us fewer headaches.
That's what I try to do, yeah. And so, technology is something that I wasn't a kid that grew up playing video games. I wasn't a kid that built computers and did anything like that. I was an outside sports playing kid. Technology came to me kind of in the Army because, I had to run the platoon laptop, basically. I had enough skills to do that. Catholic school taught me how to type. That was the one skill I left there with was typing and being able to throw a PowerPoint together after missions. Made me the computer guy in the infantry.
All right, so let's talk about in our company where you grew up and why this matters here. So where'd you grow up?
So grew up in Glenside, suburban Philadelphia. Grew up on the same street as our CEO, Mike Life. Known him forever. We crossed paths quite a bit. We ended up graduating from McDevitt together. He went off and did a bunch of things. I kind of stayed put. Didn't go to college. Didn't have a lot of direction. Was kind of, dead end. Intense labor jobs, not skilled labor, didn't have any skills. And so, I was delivering appliances, I was moving, just humping boxes, carrying stuff. Mike was off to college. We actually both went in the military about the same time. I signed up for the Army about February 2003. It's a little bit post 9/11, took a little bit. Signed up, took the ASVAB, took it twice, took it in high school, thought about going in then, didn't, probably should have. Took it again as like a, 21-year-old, did outstanding, my dad was in the Army.
Let's talk about that because that's more than what you're saying. So what was the impetus for you joining the Army? You're like, go nowhere kid, but was there more to it than that?
After 9/11, that day, I remember him saying to me, you and your buddy's going to go join up? You got nothing to do? And it was like, no, because I didn't have the insight at that point of what the impact on the world was about to be, right? And so fast forward, 11 months or so, and it starts to make more sense for me. I start to realize that there's something worth doing when I was doing very little, and B, something that I think guided my dad to what he became as a person. And so, when you're lost at that young age, go back a little bit. I'm the youngest of 8. My parents were quite a bit older than me. At the age of 17, they're hitting their 60s. They don't want to deal with teenagers, especially problematic teenagers.
So you're a bad kid.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of rules. I can say that. And so when you don't have a lot of rules at like 13 or 14, the rules that actually are real rules when you're 17, 18, 19, they don't scare you as much because you've never really had to deal with rules. And so when those rules start to impact, and I'll get to that in a minute, it's troublesome, and you realize that, being young and being reckless and not having people really pay attention to your day to day is not all it's cracked up to be. And so when I was young, people thought it was great. And then you look back and it's like, yeah, it wasn't that great.
Did you know who your dad was at a young age? Did you know what a Green Beret was? Did you know what happened in Vietnam? Did you have an understanding of what that meant because you never experienced that? You weren't around for that.
So I did. So I grew up at the VFW. So my dad was actually commander of the Jamestown VFW when I was born. Okay. And so my early life was spent around a lot of aging World War II vets, a lot of Korean vets, and then my dad's peers, the Vietnam vets that were they were steady regulars at that VFW. Not what you'd see at a VFW today. These guys that was their after work place. I grew up with them. I did understand it. We went to Bragg. every couple of years for my dad's reunions with those guys. The demonstrations they put on down there are fantastic. And as a kid, that stuff stuck with me.
Okay.
That was something, it was like, this is cool. These guys are doing cool things. My dad used to do them. I'm watching these younger guys do them, and they're even better at it. And I can tell my dad's impressed, right? And so I did understand a lot of those things. My dad was very concealed on what Vietnam was like. He talks about Panama a lot, sitting on the canal with probably a couple other group guys, and then talking about how they'd, work their way into flights to Hawaii and this and that, all these different things. And he loved telling funny stories like that. Vietnam was not something that he touched on often.
So it's interesting because I think at least the perception is certainly World War II guys probably talked less about it, but it sounds like they hung out with each other more. And I have found that too, that my grandfather hung out with veterans a lot. They didn't talk anything about it. They just talked about their golf score or their haircut or
right.
How they don't like the politicians of today,
Yes.
back in my days, et cetera, et cetera. They never talked about the experience, but at the very least you were exposed to the military itself, where my grandparents, you had to like pry it out of them of those experiences that were very traumatic, very intense, short-lived. A small percentage of at least the World War II, they were in for 2 to 3 years. It wasn't 5 or 6. It was way less, at least in my experience. And I never went to VFWs. I didn't have any understanding of that. So you were exposed to it, but maybe not the trauma, but you knew something was kind of hidden beneath.
And so we spent Memorial Days putting flags on gravestones and stuff because that was my dad's duty. And he was always part of the ceremony over there. And so everybody understood what my dad had done was what he was willing to do. And we were proud of it, even if he didn't think that so many people were, the confusion of the Vietnam vets coming back. And my dad, he went in the Army with like almost enough credits to have a bachelor's. He left Penn State at Abington to go in. His parents were thrilled. He got out, he finished, got his bachelor's at LaSalle University, ran his own company for a while and just didn't find his niche. And so ended up at the post office. I think your grandfather.
My grandfather also was a letter carrier.
So my dad worked inside the window at the Glenside post office for most of my life, from like 84 up until he retired in and around, 2010, 2011, something like that. Again, he didn't talk much about what he did day to day. It was the people, it was the jokes, it was the bureaucracy that you can't believe how this all works, And my dad he was a great guy. There was a look to not so much, live up to, but to give it some kind of effort. I had the opportunity to do something similar for my country the way you stepped up and did, and maybe I should do it. And so
as you were going, you're like, I don't necessarily love what I'm doing. It wasn't for you saw the bigger picture because of that. Growing up with it, putting flags on graves, like you understood what that meant.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so I signed my, the half contract of like, yeah, I agree to do this.
The half contract, what does that mean?
It means basically like, the recruiter gets
the MEPS thing.
It's like the appointment for MEPS. Like I agree that in 2 months
will sign.
Exactly.
So okay, understood.
And so, okay, great. I'm going to fly helicopters. Everything's going well. There was like 3 jobs that I didn't qualify for. I was so excited. I go and I work in Tampa for basically 8 weeks waiting for this lag. And recruiter calls me. He's like, "You got DUI when you were like 20 years old?" And I'm like, it went through a program. It got expunged. He started laughing. He goes, "Listen, nothing's expunged. Like right. You pay for things and that's not real." I didn't realize this. But the problem was it then got flagged as I was not so much transparent about mine. Okay. So I couldn't get a security clearance, which, okay, I had 2 jobs I couldn't get. Now I have 78 jobs I can't get, right? So it's like, what do you want to do? I'm starting a young family. I'm trying to make good decisions. And it was basically like, the recruiter in a classic recruiter way, just go in and do whatever you want. After 3 years, you put in your flight packet and all they're going to look at is, your career, which is not incorrect. He was right. And so I said, okay, great. Put me in the infantry. I'll go do cool things.
Tastes like infantry.
And that was that.
You said started a young family. So you were already
in the midst of, yes, basically 1 young kid, 1 coming shortly after this. And so by the time I leave for Iraq in September of '06, I had a 3.5-year-old and a 3-month-old.
That's a heavy burden. I didn't have that burden at all.
If I didn't, I'd probably still be in the military, or probably just getting out from my 20 years and being a very different human being, because I liked it. I was good at it. I didn't even mind the infantry, honestly. I found a lot of like-minded people who just wanted to get the job done and do something for the bigger picture.
So what was your Army experience like? So you're going now, you have a young family, you're kind of on a no-fail mission, and we're in, the start of one war and two wars. You're going into the second war.
Correct.
Of two, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
So tell me about what that journey was like.
So I'm at base training in bedding, and my original orders were the 25th in Hawaii, and I'm passing that information back, and I'm like, Hawaii's gonna be great. And then right before we graduated in early '04 from basic, the 101st had come back from OIF-1. They had seen a lot of turnover, and so basically anybody that wasn't fully contracted to go anywhere from the infantry brigades basically got sent there. And so I went from...
When you say a lot of turnover, basically people who had gone to Iraq for the first time said, I'm good, I'm out. I'm not re-enlisting.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the ETS was great. So when we got there, we coincided with...
ETS, that's end
of time in service.
Okay.
The influx of brand new guys coming in, and the loss of like the E4 mafia, if you will, the corporals, the special, the dudes that went over there for a year and fought the war. It was considerable. And so we come in, we learn a lot. We go through EIB, Expert Infantry Badge. That was something that I think I learned a lot from. You touch all the weapons. First time you go through, for me, it was the first time I went through any kind of medical training. I did end up going through Combat Lifesaver later. But for me, having the GT score I did in the infantry meant I went...
It's a GT score.
So the GT, I don't even know what it stands for, but it's basically...
Is that part of the ASVAB?
Correct.
It's Armed Service Vocational Aptitude, like the SAT for military.
Correct. So I think it may even be called something different now, but the ASVAB result. And so it just meant that I got picked to go to every school on earth.
So you had a high aptitude.
Correct. And I was like that when I was young. I had all the problems in school, but standardized testing, you hit these and everybody's confused. It's about how you teach people, but nobody knows that when you're a kid in the Catholic school causing problems because you're bored. But so, yeah, I get to my company, find a lot of great guys. I'm in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, right outside of Nashville. And we trained for a year and a half. During that time, the Army, the IEDs are going off. The Army's reconsidering what ground infantry really can be. I was in 3rd Brigade of 327 Infantry, shout out Battle Force. And then we changed to, they took the 3rd Battalion of each of the 101st Brigades and made them what they called a RISTA, which was Reconnaissance, Surveillance, and Target Acquisition. And so they took one company of infantry scouts, which was mostly filled with studs that had just come back from Iraq, and then all the new guys that they thought were going to be studs, and then a bunch of 19 Delta cavalry scouts that were mounted in Humvees. And so we basically became mounted infantry because that was the only way to really patrol Iraq during the time I was there.
So what were you mounted? What vehicles?
So they had a company, I think Delta company was in Bradley's. We were in Humvees. We had to shut down operations for a full day. We actually had the mechanics put steel underneath the Humvees because they were getting us underneath. And it was
IEDs.
Yeah.
How much steel could you put underneath those IEDs?
They were putting... So the best part about this is the Humvee that has a top speed of maybe 60 now has a 30,
35.
Exactly right. They became very slow. But you know what? I got blown up by an IED, and I'm pretty happy that there was enough armor in that thing that all of us were good to go. And so, yeah, shout out to the mechanics. And I mean, those guys got crushed.
What was that experience like, the IED? How bad was that?
So interestingly enough, when it happened, first reaction is calm. I'm the TC truck commander. It hits right on my side. Make sure the gunner's good because he's exposed more than any of us. Gunner's good. Medic's in the back. He's good. We pull up. go through your SOPs. And then it was find the guy, right? Because it was definitely,
He clocked it.
and
So there was a guy on the side of the highway who set it off.
He was about 300 meters off in a ditch. Very, very good place. When we found where he was long gone, unfortunately. But and then after the adrenaline kick, that's when you feel a little concussed. So the medic kind of was like, you should probably go back. But generally speaking, I don't hear very well. Outside of that, I'd say.
Did you have kind of a realization after that of like that could have been it right there? I mean, how long did it take in that adrenaline? So in that moment, the adrenaline happens. You don't even know what happens. So it's calm. You are totally unaware. You're like, okay, something bad happened, and we seem to be okay. Adrenaline, looking for this guy, and you're like, that could have been it for me.
So my dad was blown up by a landmine in Vietnam driving a Deuce and a half. A very big truck, very big explosion. My dad's
2,500 pound truck.
2.5 tons.
2.5 tons.
And so I have an ammo box at home with like the buffer spring of his M16 that is just mangles. Very interesting. But he spent about 18 months in the hospital in Honolulu and then here to Valley Forge, which is where he met my mom, interestingly enough. It was kind of surreal, honestly, thinking of how similar these two paths had gone, but how lucky I was that technology had put me in a spot to not have my leg mangled like his was. And so when I look back at it, the things that made me uncomfortable afterwards were when we made mistakes. And so we expected IEDs. It was really the way they were trying to fight against us. We were just trying to prepare ourselves as best we could. Right as we were doing like our left seat ride before we were leaving, we had gotten tricked into a pretty bad spot, gotten ambushed. That situation where in the moment, the adrenaline kicks, everything happens, you do what you do. That was something afterwards that I thought that very well could have been it.
So when you say left seat, what does that mean?
So left seat ride, right seat ride is the idea that when you're swapping out with a big enough team, you basically take them as, we show you, then you show us that you can do it, and then we're out.
So we refer to those as turnover ops. I knew what you meant. But what I have found in my career is that turnover ops were the most casualties were on turnover ops. And perhaps some of that was the demonstration of it, the unfamiliarity with how you work, how I work, what I look like in the middle of the night, what you look like. Very often, I know what my teammates will do before they do it because I've trained with them so much. As soon as I see someone go hard in a direction, I know what that means. And when you see somebody else, even though they might be even better, but you just don't know how they respond. And for some reason, historically, the bad days in my community were on turnover ops.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. I get it. So my unit, we wore the clubs. The 101st all has their, and so Bastogne Brigade, 3rd Brigade wears the clubs. My battalion in OIF 1 were the guys that took out Uday and Kusai. There was, I don't want to say notoriety, but the Iraqi people understood who was there for business and who was there to get through. And so we were replaced with a guard unit that fully admitted they thought they were going to sit at like a transport depot in the desert. They get put in the city of Muqtadiya. They're not thrilled. And to your point, I think everybody that lived there very much knew our time was coming to an end. New guys were coming in, and they did try to take advantage. Absolutely.
So you go through this experience. What were some highlights of it? What were good experiences? Was there ever a moment that was like, this is pretty cool?
So something that brought me to 3 weeks ago, driving around Iraq, the one thing, especially, we patrolled, I think it was like 45 miles of like the Iranian border. We had what we called Magic Mountain, which was like a comms, resense that we had like 6 guys. I was on the PSD for a lieutenant colonel who ran our battalion. I ran one of the trucks. We drove a lot. He wanted to see his troops. And so we were hitting each individual, FOB and AO. And so we played the Kevin Bacon game over the radio all the time.
What does that mean? So
basically, I think it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, whatever it is. But it's basically like okay, I got an actor. And so it'd be like, Robert De Niro. I got him in 1. And then the radio would go silent. And someone's like, I got him in 3. I don't know how you have him in 1. And goes like that. And so we played this religiously. And so I'm a movie buff. My platoon sergeant, Bobby Munoz, he's a movie buff. We go back and forth. And so working ZeroEyes last month, one of our SROs, that is the liaison for one of our clients, is named Kevin Bacon. And so we go through our implementation, and he was great. And I told him about exactly that exact scenario. And so we got some pictures, and I texted Bobby Munoz. After all these years, I think it's safe to say that I won the Kevin Bacon game. And he said, yeah, no, I'll concede you win. Me and my medic Josh talk about all the time that we invented binge watching. We watched the entire catalog of Friends in about a week.
I think it's interesting to see, the highest echelon of the military, the up times, the down times, what you're able to do. And, they do work really, really hard. And in the midst of it, that they will binge watch Friends or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Maybe the show is cooler than that. But given enough of deployments, even the most cold-blooded killer that you ever met in your entire life eventually watched some silly show all in a row and got hooked on, vampire stuff or whatever it is. And you're like, I love
Robert
Twilight
Sanford
now,
novels.
like whatever. And like just because like you need kind of downtime, and somebody's just like, surprisingly, I really love reading Twilight, and then people catch on that, whatever it is.
My platoon sergeant got into Robert Sanford novels. I can't even remember who wrote them, but they were available down in Balad, basically at the free library.
Right.
And so, we read like one, and then next thing you know, we're searching for them. And I went through about 6 of them, and it was like this retired detective that was a tech genius, and he would solve.
Right.
And that's what I read over there because they were easy reads that filled time. And so, yeah, you're right. It's what you find interest in over there when you don't have cable TV and things like that is funny.
Was there any kind of moment that was kind of a low point?
I think seeing some of the younger guys deal with some of the family strain of being away for that long and things not going the way you hoped that they would. I think that bothered me a lot. I felt bad for, we had guys coming back from leave. Their bank accounts are empty because this happened and that happened. And you lose people. It's a war. None of it's fun. But the things that you don't expect. And that's the type of things that I felt like you don't expect people's entire lives to crumble while they're over here trying to do something well. And some of the people that I saw that happen to while over there have struggled to recover to this day, 20 years later. And that would be my low point of it is, just the unknown.
Family betrayals.
Okay, well, yeah, without getting into it, but that's exactly it.
So you did a deployment in Iraq. What happened next?
I wanted away. Like I said, I had 2 little kids. I had a wife, and I was responsible for these slideshows after every op. And so every day I'm compiling 75 photos of us in Iraq, talking to people, looking at things, doing things. And so I used the platoon laptop to basically build like a 15-minute movie for my wife and kids. Nothing distasteful. It wasn't, on battles. It was just us in the country and something that they could look at, something my dad told me, take as many photos as you can. And of course, you're not exactly allowed to just walk around taking photos. And so I kind of had the advantage of having access to a bunch of photos that were purposely taken. And so I made this movie, got out of the Army. First thing I did when I got out of the Army, started delivering appliances again because the infantry doesn't really give you those skills. I think what they do now with the transitioning veterans is amazing. Like when I was getting out in 06, I was basically told to go be a cop. Wasn't really what I expected to do, but I had to think about it because there wasn't much else. And so my wife actually, I was maybe 3 weeks out, and she said, this movie's pretty amazing. You should go do something with computers. And so what does that mean? I don't know. Hey, I am good with computers. So I thought I was going to go, maybe be on behind the scenes of a podcast, basically doing some really neat engineering stuff. I found a vocational school. I used my GI Bill, went to school for network engineering, found a very steady, very boring job for a very long time. Kind of wanted to get out of IT, actually. Didn't enjoy it. Really said to myself, this isn't what I was meant to do, because I wasn't finding any thrill in what I was doing. It was really, I plateaued. The guy took a huge chance on me, gave me a way bigger opportunity to expand my knowledge and then my skill set. And then COVID hit. I get this opportunity to basically become a network engineer, do the things that I went to school for a bigger, larger enterprise. And COVID hits. And not in a million years could you have told me that there'd be this worldwide pandemic and that network engineering would be this super niche thing that it's like, hey, you know how to make people work from home? That's actually pretty valuable right now. And so since 2020, I've been at ZeroEyes for over 2 years now. And this is the 4th job I've had since then. Unexpected. I went from one job for 16 years, and then it's just been boom, 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 boom. And a lot of it's due to.
So what was that? You held a job for a really long time. You said you stagnated, but what aspects of that did anything scratch an itch for you? For some reason, you wanted to make a video, so you had to learn how to do that. Because you did that, you started to have more interest in something. You had an intellectual curiosity. You pursued that. You stagnated. What were you doing on the side to make yourself better? Was there anything? You said that you had a good mentor, but were there other things on the side that kind of, filled your bucket, whatever that is, that made you want to go to work?
I would say I got out of the Army. I also had 3 more children in 38 months. And so there wasn't too much side time. And a lot of the reason I stayed at that job was the inability to take the risk and make a little less for a better opportunity. I was offered it. It wasn't for a lack of opportunities. It was the convenience of the salary and the benefits that I had in that place. The ability for me to live at that level was very hard to leave until there was something better. And so I'd say I spent the last 6 years there interviewing, pursuing, trying to make things better, trying to develop a different skill set. I can say I got unbelievably good at interviewing, something that, is hard. And I left interviews unbelievably just crushed. Yeah, you went to school for these things, but you've never done them, right? And so there's this big in IT, you don't know until you know. Until you tell me that you can configure a firewall, I'm not going to let you touch a firewall, because if you brick it, I'm going to kill you, right? And so how do you get an opportunity without having the experience? Very, very difficult bump to get over. And so someone took a chance on me. He probably shouldn't have, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let him down. And so from that moment on, I've put every effort I can into being a better network engineer, a better solutions engineer. And so getting through, like with the managed service stuff, when I interviewed with them, I flat out told them, I'm fairly certain I'm not qualified to do this. And the guy laughed and he goes, listen, if you told me you thought you could come in and do this today, I probably wouldn't hire you. He's like, because nobody knows how to do all of this. But you give me a year, you'll be exposed to so much that you will be able to go do all of this. And that's kind of what I left there with. And so that may have been the best job for my career to stay with. But for me, IT has always been this thing where it's like, you're making a rich guy richer, right? And so I did educational IT for some time, and that was a little bit more rewarding, especially through COVID. And then coming out of that and going to work for a managed service provider where it is about billable hours. It's about, I know what you're charging for me right now, and I know what I'm getting back from it. At ZeroEyes for me was about taking all of those skills that I had learned at all of those jobs and going to work for something that's actually doing something worthwhile.
I think what's interesting throughout that, in order to get somebody who knows networks, you go find somebody who's run one network for a really long time. And so that person who's been exposed to that one environment as an expert on it should know networking, right? Theoretically. And what we've found is that's not necessarily true. that you have seen one network that's probably been upgraded 6 times throughout your career. The 20 years that you've been doing it, you've seen 6 networks. And at this point, you've done that. And now that you've jumped into this, I think your acceleration, your knowledge has gained, because now instead of 6 networks, you've seen 1,006 networks.
Exactly.
And you saw how 1,000 different people do that. And nobody can kind of look in and be like, there's better ways to do this. That the way that you're doing it, you're choking yourself right here. The person could be really competent, but they just haven't been exposed to those other things. And the same thing of, don't touch a firewall unless you can totally fix it,
Right.
because you'll destroy our whole company, basically.
Right.
If you break one firewall, or you can expose people to risk, or whatever it is. There's so many bad things. A firewall can shut you down from anything, and then it can expose you to everything. It's one of those things that you have to be very careful on. And a lot of people don't want to touch anything for that reason. They're afraid to break something.
Sure.
Reasonably so they don't know how to break or fix something, kind of. And when we see different iterations of that, you learn the most. Now, that being said, how do you trust people within the company, and how do you bring people up? Because you're the mentor of a lot of younger people and exposing them the first time. How do you bring them on the journey that you went on faster?
I've never been intimidated by technology. And I think that's because I didn't grow up loving it. And so I have this feeling of like, it all works the same way. You can make it look very cool and fast and brilliant, but it either talks or it doesn't. And there's a way to figure out why. And so for me, it's, it gives a lot of lessons from the Army, keep it simple, stupid. What's the easiest cause if it's not connected? You learn that through going through all those numbers. Believe me, I've bricked tons of things. The idea would be, crawl, walk, run.
Right.
And so
a question to go back to the very beginning of leaving the Army. I think a lot of veterans get out, and even very high performing people. I would say going even to get my MBA in an elite program with people who went to service academies, with people who are smart, they're afraid of technology. And you're saying that you didn't like it. I've always liked technology, so I've been less afraid to break stuff and fix it and tinker with it, because I used to set up, LAN parties to play, GoldenEye, so you couldn't you couldn't share my screen. Like, you were trying to solve a problem initially, being like, you're watching my screen, you cheater. Sure. I want a different TV.
Yep.
And then, then it was Halo, and that was a little easier to do a LAN party. Whatever the case may be, it was to solve issues so I could play video games, like a lot of it, and building PCs. But throughout the thing, making a cooler platoon video, that was a thing that occurred. How did you embrace technology in something that is typically not an enlisted infantry guy's thing?
So, interestingly enough, almost solely on the idea that I knew how to type. And so we're in Iraq, we're in Muqtadia, in this basement of this terrible dungeon prison that we lived in. And okay, we have a laptop and we have all these pictures, and there's an expectation, right? So that expectation gets set, and it's like anywhere. You got a lot of guys looking around, it's like, well, who knows how to do it? Well, none of us know how to do it, because none of us have ever been taught any of these things. But our boss now wants this. And so it's like, okay, someone sit down and start typing, because someone can type in the password and get into the laptop. That was basically it. The rest of these guys are looking at this thing like, I don't even want to use it. I don't want to, because they all think they're going to break it. I'm not afraid to break it. If it breaks, it breaks. It was just like the cheesy Glocks we would give to the Iraqi police. I broke one of them, just messing with it because it was plastic. It's not my fault it broke. It shouldn't have broke. I feel the same way about technology. You know what I mean? We tell it what to do, not the other way around. And so if you look at technology as something that you control, as opposed to something that controls all of the things that we do, I think it gives you a much more logical way to not only troubleshoot, but to design.
There's a weird thing that I think is counterintuitive to a lot of people, and listening to you, is a lot of it is I think that I need to go to school to prepare for something, right? I need to become an expert before I begin. I need to go all the way down the road before I take my first step. At least in my mind, I need to have it planned. And what I'm hearing from you is something that I kind of preach internally, is do the thing.
Right.
Begin and learn by doing, and then mess it up and learn as you're going forward. And it's really intimidating. And with technology, when you don't have that background, you say, we control it, not the other way around. It doesn't control us. So when you tinker and you break and you're not afraid of it, and you started doing that because you could type, which sounds ludicrous to me, by the way.
It is.
I think it is interesting that the best thing you could do is jump in. And I think it's funny watching, in my MBA program, seeing these people who went to service academies, who had high performing jobs and do that. You put them in front of a computer, be like, build a macro that just uses Excel better. And they're comfortable with Excel, but they're like, oh man, I have to go take all these classes. They're like, no, just ask somebody how to do the one thing and solve the one problem. And I think life is better when you're just trying to solve one problem. And when you come up with a solution that I don't like screen watching in Bond 007, so I want 2 TVs. How can I network this? Because I'm mad at you because I've got the golden gun. We're slappers only. Whatever it was from that video game that was like really rudimentary, and it was hard for us to solve the problem. And it was angry because I was losing. And you solve that, and then you just keep solving small problems instead of saying, I want a beautiful solution all at once. And there's something weird that clicks with people who are willing to just break something to start and then go forward. I think that they have more success than people who want the whole plan written out first, because the whole plan never works.
The whole plan leads to, for me, in my experience, and throughout all these companies, when you want an overall shift, whether it's process, whether it's naming convention, however, your file system, you want to change something. Okay, what do you want to change? What needs to be done before you can make these changes? The preparation steps make everything better every time. Those are the things nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to clean up naming conventions. Nobody wants to adhere to not just hitting download and dropping. Nobody wants to rename things. Nobody wants to have these rules in place that make their lives hard.
So again, to hit the audience who's listening to it, a lot of this is naming conventions are literally just what things are titled, and
right?
And sometimes it doesn't make sense, and you just have to make sure it either says the thing that the language they speak, or you're changing the language. Which one do we want to do? Do you want us to clean that and make everything make sense? You're like, no, we actually speak this language. Oh, we don't. And all of they're really simple, and it's fundamentally on a checklist. Like the first thing, I need to now understand what it is that you want. And it turns out to be far simpler than you think.
Way simpler. And when you get to the bigger things that people want to do, I want to automate this. I want to have these files and we're going to have our 30-day retention, then it goes to cold data and all these things. And you can do that through drives. But if you want to automatically index files, audit files, do anything like that, and you don't have these conventions set, it is so much more difficult. If you want to change a bunch of servers and you don't have a naming convention to use, it is so much more difficult. And so these big projects lead to small changes that overall make companies so much better.
So here's another kind of simple thing. You use the word that people use a lot with us, and it's automation.
Sure.
What does automation mean?
Automation to me inside of computing can mean a million things. I think automation overall to me means taking any task that someone's manually doing and formulate a way to give the same result.
So it's really funny that people at a very high level say, automate it. And you say, automate what?
Right.
And then you have to go through it. In order to automate anything, you have to do something so many times that it becomes so annoying that you want to solve a problem. And you're like, this step, this step, this step, this step. And you have to get all the way down to the most basic thing. Otherwise it breaks.
True.
Then you have to figure out why each step breaks. When someone says automated, I laugh because they've never automated anything.
Correct.
And they're just like, automate it. And you're like, well, I have to do 75 steps. I have to take a long time to do this so that it's fast in the future. And the only reason I'm going to do it is it's faster for me to automate it than to do it. And for a really long time, it's faster to do it than automate it.
Sure.
And at that moment, when that changes, you do it. And you need the internal team. Nobody external can really automate for you. You have to do it.
And so when you bring in, that's a lot of times I talk about, even with changes like an ISP change or things like that at a higher level can look like, oh, look at this savings. You can't automate that change. Someone has to manually take the new circuit, change all of our routes out the firewall. When you look at the planning, you look at all those things, it's like, is that $500 a month cheaper over the course of next year? Probably not. Are we, making more financially based decisions? Yes, but we need to build in that back end of what you're trying to do actually costs, right? And so with automation, it's the same thing. Do we put forth the effort and the money it takes to make all of these processes as clean as they can be in order to automate them? Because it's got to be clean. Everything's got to be clean. And so, dirty data, dirty processes, dirty documentation, those things make automation near impossible.
What do you think allows you to enjoy what we're talking about right now, which could be like watching paint dry because it's majoring in the minors, it's attention to detail. A lot of it is, short strokes, fell great oaks. Like you could make it look miraculous at the end of the day if you do these 75 steps properly and automate them exactly properly. And every time you make a change, you are meticulous on that so it doesn't break the whole thing, because everything breaks everything all the time. And to be able to troubleshoot what broke it is actually difficult and is an art form.
Sure.
And you have to enjoy that. What in your brain, what in your mind scratches an itch for you that you're good at it? Because when you talk about it, I can hear passion.
You're definitely right. And I think it's the analytical problem solving, right? And so it's the idea that there's a way this works no matter what, because almost nothing's impossible. You can write it and you can tell it, hey, you may never have known how to work, but I'm going to tell you how to work. I mean, that's the idea of firmware, right? Is telling software how to use hardware, right? Hey, you didn't know this before, but guess what now you can do with this same chip? Those type of things, it is something that's exhilarating. You talked earlier about mentorship, and
that's a big part of what you do in the company. So I want you to delve into that just a little bit.
So I think when I was in higher ed, we had a lot of student workers that funneled in and out. You have all these really smart engineers. So we had a systems engineer, we had a Linux engineer, he was our director. I'm at the network level. And you have these really simple problems. Like I was saying earlier, keep it simple, stupid, right? So you have a network guy that's like, hey, it could be the VLAN, it could be the access layer, it could be this. He's a systems guy, like, it could be, check his system updates, check this, maybe his antivirus isn't good. What we really need is those guys to actually work with us and say, this is what a user does every day, right? And so the processes and understanding how to make users' lives better, right? And so in all of these stages throughout my career, we've grabbed these low-level techs that are really good users. And it's like, hey, whenever you have time, you're going to be our user to test these tickets. We're going to build these things. We need you to make sure they work because we don't even really understand how your level works. In each of those circumstances, prior to me getting ZeroEyes, I've turned those lower level guys from whether it's a help desk user services person all the way up to engineers by basically bringing them on, sharing the work. I'm very much I learn by doing, all right? I think to some of what you were saying, what makes me good at this and what I've seen with people that are also good at this is usually an incredibly good memory. And I know that doesn't sound like it is something important, but like I remember passwords that I had in the Army and I've been out since 2006. So when you can remember IP addresses, passwords, subnets, your ability to work through issues faster than people that can't do that is extraordinary. And so I've always found that taking those things into account, showing younger guys how I make those connections. Like, do I need to store this? Do I create a template? If I want to run this again, how do I do it better the next time, right? And so these are the guys that are going to do good documentation because they're not the one doing the work. It's very hard to efficiently do IT work when every second of every day you're screenshotting what you do, you're putting that in, then you have to go back and do that. Now we do it because we have to, but it makes everything take longer. And when you can get guys where you kind of give them that assignment while you work through things, you can kind of kill these things simultaneously, and it allows them to see the exact process and understand, oh, hey, this broke. This is how we fixed it. It allows them to start taking the onus of understanding the big picture, and the big picture is it's all set up to work. If it doesn't work, something probably broke. And so
Fix it.
Exactly right. I'm more passionate about having younger people take advantage. And so the installers here, I would have killed to have been an installer at an AI company as a 23-year-old or 26-year-old when I got out of the Army and have the ability to go work my way out of these client environments, learn all of this networking, learn all of this app stack that we're working with. And those guys are going to be CTOs and stuff when they're my age. You know what I mean? You said, I'm your go-to guy. I expect more out of almost all of them because their head start is light years above what mine is. And so what I want them to do is, understand, not about jumping out of this first position. Don't look at this as a quick stepping stone. Take it for everything it's worth so that the next job you have, you're confident. You're not going in saying, I think I can do this. You're hired because you can do it. And I feel like every one of those guys that we set up and run through the training that Adam has and then Soto and them, and they are set up for an enormous successful tech career. And I hope that I can help them in any way I can.
So jump in the pool as soon as you can.
Yes.
How did you learn to type?
So we didn't really have a computer growing up.
Okay.
We were pretty modest. My mom is an incredible typer. She probably in her heyday was typing close to 90 words per minute.
Okay.
We had a word processor. She was a legal secretary for years. We had a word processor at home. That's how I would type
Smith
my papers.
Corona?
Little brother ribbon word processor. And that's how I did all my high school reports. And, after about the first or second one, my mom, like I said, at this point, she's about 60, still working, not really looking forward to doing homework, and was like, you type. And so I learned a little bit. And then I think sophomore year at McDevitt, I'd been to, like I said, quite a few schools. So when I would move from one school to the other, there was a lot of times conflict of like, well, you already took this class, but this is the class that the rest of these kids should be taking. And so my sophomore year at McDevitt, I took a senior typing class. That's all it was. I ended up being the kid that did all the work and then saved the word file with Doug's name, saved the word file with Kelly's name. And so I basically was the software that did all of the work for the whole typing class.
Cheater.
Pretty much. My wife, Melissa, she was only a year behind me. She got a full Microsoft Office suite because it was right at that time. So I got a typing class. She got Excel, PowerPoint, Word, all these things. And so the transition to more computer literacy was right behind me. But yeah, I had a typing class and I had a mom who stressed typing. And so I'm still a pretty skilled typer.
So when I was in school, and we're the same age, so it started off very young of like the Apple II, like in school where we would play games.
Oregon Trail.
Or Oregon Trail was one of the games, right? And then there was another one where you sold hot dogs or hamburgers at a stadium and you had to set prices. I don't remember what that one was called.
Neither do I.
And it was an educational thing. And honestly, it was good. It was, if you priced them too high, nobody would buy them. Mm-hmm. Like you had to figure out ratios. You'd take the profits from one week to the next.
Sure.
It's kind of an interesting experiment at that age group. And then there was a typing game that you would try to compete with
ASDF.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I learned to type on that, and I still am a terrible typer. I basically hunt and peck, but that was definitely a thing. And as we got older, the typing games got better. I want to say that there was like a zombie game, the typing of like you kill zombies by typing or something like that. Like they had a bunch of them that I was a little jealous of because I was like too young. I learned to type that four-way. Like I don't really even use touch keys. Like I do, but I'm terrible. I couldn't listen to stuff and type.
Is typing a skill that lasts? So I had a really interesting conversation with my brother-in-law about 4 years ago. My kids are going through their teenage years with their phones and the emojis, the abbreviations, and all these things, and they drive me crazy. So I am also, I text as if I'm writing a novel. Punctuation's right, everything. I'm the same way in our Slack messages. My kids haven't capitalized a letter in 10 years. And it drives me insane. And my brother-in-law said, Think about your mom getting 150 emails in a day in 1985. Could she have functioned in her job? And I was like, no, absolutely not. She wouldn't even have known how to. She would have thought that was the busiest any human could have ever been.
Right.
Because, but you do it every day. These kids are going to develop the communication that they're going to use to work with each other. And if they can type 150 words per minute on a tablet device with their thumbs, the keyboard goes away.
Right.
Because I'm a dinosaur in this industry.
Right.
And they are going to set the market, right? And so typing is probably something that I don't even know if they teach anymore because it's just such a thing that's not.
It's weird. The texting on the phone, on the keypads, I never really did. I didn't text at that point. I basically didn't start texting until I got smartphones.
Yeah.
But a lot of my, people who are younger could text under a table, and you wouldn't be looking at them. They would be doing that, on tapping on it 3 times for this letter, 3, whatever. And and that's where a lot of the shorthand that still gets used today, that's unnecessary because you don't need to, but they did because you have to type 3 times for each letter for the letters that take 3 types. I don't know off the top of my head.
Right.
But the reason that, like, see you later, like whatever it is, like, it's just to make it easier. You don't need that anymore. And so even generationally, all that stuff goes away. And sometimes we're left with the remnants. It's like the story of pot roast. Have you ever heard this one? That the mother asks, a daughter goes to her mother, why does grandma always cut the ends off the pot roast? And you're like, well, okay, I'm going to show you how to cook it. Always cut the ends off, put it in the oven. And one day the daughter's like, hey, why do we do this? She's like, that's the way my grandma always did it. It goes to her grandma, like, why do we do this? Like, the pan wasn't big enough. I couldn't fit the pot roast in, so I always cut the ends off. And the mom thought that it was cut off, not for the pan, but that was how the recipe was. So you're 3 generations later, you shouldn't be cutting the ends off. You're just wasting meat. And it was like the pot didn't fit it. And now it does. And like, you're just going through steps that you don't know why. And if you don't ask why all the time, that's the way we always did it.
That's a great anecdote. That's good stuff. The texting, the night I got home from Iraq, Melissa is the most maternal person I've ever seen in my entire life. And so her ability to handle my 5 kids, handle me as a 6th child, and allow me to pursue all of these things that I have is really important. And to this day, my ability to pivot for you guys when needed. I have the confidence to make those decisions and do that because she kicks ass. Looking back, the night I'm coming home, she's got 2 little kids. She can't meet me at Campbell. So everybody gets off the plane. I've been away a year. There's lots of emotions. Like me and basically this one dude, Brad Moore, and he's like, you want to go see a movie? And I'm like, yeah, that works. So we dump our stuff, and The Departed, great movie, had come out the day before.
Okay.
And so I thought of this because we watched that movie, and at this point,
cranberry juice.
At this point, we have not probably ever texted anybody with numbers like that.
Right.
So we leave, and it's like I have a flip phone. I don't know what a text is. The scene in the movie where Matt Damon's in his pocket texting full words without looking.
Right.
At that moment, we look at each other. I'm like, this is the dumbest. Nobody can do that. And then you're explaining how the whole world could do
everybody
that.
Could do
we
it.
just didn't understand. Yeah. Exactly right. And,
yeah. Now nobody could do it. Like, they'd be like, that's a dinosaur would do that. And like, I'm older than that. Like the generation, I just didn't. I just call them up. And then texting became so easy that it was better. And now it's honestly a superior form of communication.
I don't think people answer phone calls anymore.
All right. So let's kind of bring it to an end. You came out of the military through learning to type, through a video. You decided that a passion like that you didn't see coming, or maybe a calling. I don't know.
I'd say a call.
What advice would give someone else transitioning looking for that next calling?
So I'd say it's a calling because you never know what you're good at, right? And so I never in a million years thought I would have been good at this, nor would I have thought that I would have come to work for you guys and enjoyed something like this, right? This is not something that was on my radar probably up until the last 10 years of my life. And so if you're transitioning, I think keeping your eyes open on what can be, right? And so I don't know what I'll be doing in a year. I'm fairly certain it'll be working at ZeroEyes. We could need something that changes my priorities, and we're not talking about me being a network engineer. We're talking about me being, a sales engineer and that whole linear. And so This is like open-mindedness. Is being scared of something that you haven't done before is going to keep you away from realizing something you didn't know you could do.
I think that's good. What are some either movies or books that you've read that have made you who you are? Is there anything that stands out that either you really enjoyed and didn't make who you are, but it's something that it brings you peace at times? And is there a book that, you read every couple of years because you like what you get out of it? Or are there any movies that are just funny that like you keep going back to? Or are there any that made you who you are? Books and movies? A couple.
Yeah, I mean, movie wise, so I grew up, my dad was like a James Dean fan. We only had one TV. I grew up with like, Giant, Rebel Without a Cause being like, hey, it's like, if that's on, it's a click and stick. And it's like, oh, geez. But some of the stuff my dad did love, like The Godfathers and things like that stuck to me. I think a big movie for me that I still will go back to now is the movie Heat. And so growing up in the 80s with De Niro and Val Kilmer and Al Pacino and these just super blockbuster actors, and then putting them all together in this action film that I think delivers almost at every corner. And so if I had to pick something out that's not super chalky, I think I'd go with Michael Mann's film Heat.
In the SEAL teams, there's a character named Wayne Grow in the movie who is overzealous and shoots first. And I don't know if this is the case anymore, but it was long after that movie had come out. And if you had taken like when shots are coming in and out, like shots fired can mean either that I'm shooting or they're shooting at me. And when you said you would come over and say bang, 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 and somebody just comes over the radio and says Wayne Grow, that was basically being like, I am shooting at them.
Right.
Not
that makes sense.
Shot, like sometimes, we are taking fire is the other thing, but we would call out Wayne Grow. Wayne Grow.
So we
that
actually,
from Heat.
Right after they rob and they get blown up with the cops, their break fire is almost textbook. Yeah. The way they basically...
It's a good movie.
It's a really good movie. And so, yeah, book-wise, I've read a lot of things growing up. I think the Catcher in the Rye was this thing that everybody thought should resonate with me because everybody had this idea of the way my brain worked. I thought Holden Caulfield was kind of a pussy. I did not like that book. So if I had to pick a book that I think I really thought just hit everything, Othello. So I read a lot of Shakespeare. I didn't like almost any of it. Othello was the realest emotional story I think I ever was told without it being on screen. It is jealousy. It is everything. So, you're totally just vulnerable, even though you're the king. And it's a great book. Great story.
When I read Catcher in the Rye when I was 16, when you were supposed to read it, I hated it. And I thought the same thing. And I think that Holden Caulfield is unlikable. I think he's an unlikable character on purpose, and you're supposed to go along with it. And oddly, when I was probably like 27, I reread it. And then I understood, and I could see not a 16-year-old. I didn't see me in it anymore. When I was 16, I thought Holden was supposed to represent me, and I was like, I don't understand anything about this book. And then when I was 27, instead of seeing Holden Caulfield, I saw J.D. Salinger's writing about the thing that was like, it resonated with me for some weird reason, and it wasn't about a 16-year-old's journey. It was about the feelings that a probably 40-year-old writer wrote into a 16-year-old that don't make any sense. That like no 16-year-old would do the things that Holden Caulfield does. It doesn't make any sense.
Right, exactly.
And the dream of catching kids falling off the side of a cliff. The title doesn't make any sense. Like it's a fever dream. And for some reason that resonated. That's kind of funny. And then Othello, which is, I wouldn't take you for a Shakespeare guy.
Macbeth, Hamlet. Oh, you want me to check out of something, then that's pretty quick. But like I said, it's not that he couldn't tell a good story, because obviously, hundreds of years of experts have told me otherwise. But just going through all of them, the only one that, after page 6 that had me hooked was Othello. And it had me hooked until the very, I wanted to see the end of that story. And it's the only one I cared about. You get into like the Great Expectations and the Dickens stuff that we were forced to read, and I didn't care what happened to any of those people.
Charles Dickens was very tough for me to read.
Yeah.
And I've never gone back to reread, so I have not given that a second chance. I've never dislike the book that I read more than A Tale of Two Cities.
So interestingly enough, I believe the third Christopher Nolan Batman, the one with Bane, is somewhat based on A Tale of Two Cities.
Oh, really?
And when you look at it in those, so I do love how movies can take those type of old stories and create a modern version of it. That interests me.
That's cool.
It is.
I read A Tale of Two Cities and I can't even remember it. I know how it begins, but that's about it. I could tell you the opening line. It was the best of times. It was the worst of, Then the rest of the book is garbage to me at the time. I'm sure it's good, but okay. So Army to technology, taking unexpected leaps. You control technology. It doesn't control you. Is there any last kind of bit of wisdom you want to do before we're done here?
Drive fast, take chances, man. As my great brother-in-law TJ would say.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to ZeroEyes.com/Nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.